Will you marry me?
Yes. The Jeju sunrise did not bleed gold. It bled a sharp, expensive saffron that caught the edges of Min Jae Park's cream linen trousers. He stood at the very precipice of the volcanic cliff, the wind from the Korea Strait tugging at his ivory shirt, revealing the flick of a black dragon's tail inked into the hollow of his collarbone. Behind him, the Jeju Visionary Retreat was in full swing, but the air had gone unnaturally still. The silence wasn't accidental. It was commanded. 10 feet away, Nyla Adeyemi stood like a monolith of champagne silk and dark, glowing skin. Her natural curls were pinned in a crown that caught the morning mist, and her gold waist chain glinted with every rhythmic breath. She looked less like an architect and more like the foundation upon which the island was built. Min Jae didn't look at the cameras, yet he knew exactly where they were. 6 4K lenses were positioned to capture every micro-expression, live streaming this moment to the boardrooms of London and the tech hubs of Seoul. This was branding assassination disguised as a fairy tale. With the slow, deliberate grace of a predator settling into a crouch, Min Jae dropped to one knee. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below filled the void left by the hushed crowd. He reached into his pocket and produced a ring that didn't just sparkle, it commanded attention. A rare deep blue diamond set in industrial titanium. It was a shackle draped in luxury. "Nyla Adeyemi," he said, his voice a low melodic vibration that carried perfectly to the lapel microphones. "You build worlds that sustain life. I want to build a future that protects yours." It was a masterpiece of a lie. To the millions watching, it was the ultimate romantic gesture. To Nyla, it was a chokehold. If she said no, the headlines would read, "Arrogant architect rejects visionary tycoon," ruining her soft power reputation in Asia before the retreat even ended. If she said yes, her clean, sustainable brand would be forever stained by the ink beneath his sleeves, the shadow empire he moved through like a ghost. Min Jae looked up at her, his dark sunglasses hiding eyes that were undoubtedly cold, calculating the seconds until her inevitable social collapse. He expected a tremor in her hands. He expected the frantic blinking of a woman who had realized she was trapped. But Nyla didn't blink. She looked down at the ring, then at the man who thought he had outdesigned her. Slowly, a smile spread across her face, not the giddy grin of a bride-to-be, but the sharp, terrifying smile of a grand master who had seen the trap 3 moves ago and walked into it anyway. She reached out, her fingers steady as stone, and touched the cold metal of the ring. "Yes, Min Jae," she said, her voice echoing with a clarity that silenced the wind. The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment the predator realized he wasn't the only one hunting in paradise. The blue diamond slid onto Nyla's finger with a click that sounded to her like a vault locking from the inside. The crowd erupted, a filtered, polite roar of influencers and investors, but Nyla didn't hear them. She leaned into Min Jae's personal space, her champagne silk brushing against his linen, the scent of expensive sandalwood and sea salt enveloping her. To the cameras, it looked like a breathless embrace. To Min Jae, it was the first time he felt the temperature in Jeju actually drop. "I believe in building powerful partnerships," Nyla projected towards the nearest lens, her voice a silk ribbon over a razor blade. She turned back to Min Jae, her eyes locking onto the dark lenses of his glasses. "Shall we take this inside, fiancé? We have so much to discuss regarding our shared assets." Min Jae's hand remained on her waist, a proprietary grip that was meant to signal ownership, but as they walked toward the glass-walled villa overlooking the cliff, he felt the subtle shift in her gait. She wasn't being led. She was escorting him to his own interrogation. The moment the heavy oak door thudded shut, the atmospheric hum of the retreat vanished. Min-jae pulled off his sunglasses, revealing eyes as sharp and obsidian as volcanic glass. He expected a negotiation, perhaps a plea for a quiet annulment once the cameras stopped rolling. Instead, Nyla walked to the obsidian-topped bar, poured 2 fingers of neat whiskey, and didn't offer him a drop. "The Cayman accounts were a nice touch, Min-jae," she said, her back to him. Her voice was conversational, almost bored. But using the Jeju Green initiative as a shell for the Busan port kickbacks, that was sloppy. For a man who moves silently, you've left quite a trail of digital breadcrumbs in the Caymans, the Seychelles, and specifically the HSBC branch in Zurich. Min-jae froze. The calm predator energy he radiated usually acted as a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Nyla simply breathed through it. "You didn't propose to me because you wanted a wife," she continued, turning to face him, the blue diamond flashing mockingly. "You proposed because the South Korean Financial Supervisory Service is 3 weeks away from freezing your tech assets. You needed my clean architectural brand, the global face of sustainability, to act as a front for the new Jeju development. You're not looking for a partner. You're looking for a laundry service." A slow, dangerous smile crept across Min-jae's face, not one of warmth, but of genuine, terrifying recognition. He stepped closer, the minimalist black dragon on his arm seeming to writhe as his muscles tensed. He had spent years ensuring no one could see the ghost in his machines, yet this woman had dismantled his entire architecture in a single morning. "You've been busy, Nyla," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "I don't just build buildings, Min-jae. I study the ground they're built on," she replied, stepping into his space until their chests nearly touched. "You tried to trap me, but you forgot that a wolf doesn't care if the cage is gold." She tapped the ring against his chest. "We're going to build that resort, but we're doing it on my terms. Otherwise, I'll take this live stream and turn it into a confession." Min-jae looked at her, really looked at her, and realized his branding assassination hadn't just failed. He hadn't caught a victim. He had just invited the most dangerous woman in the world into his inner circle. The air in the villa was thick with the scent of ozone and expensive scotch, a private storm brewing behind soundproofed glass. Min-jae leaned against the mahogany desk, his cream linen shirt unbuttoned just enough to reveal the jagged edge of the dragon's wing on his chest. He watched Nyla as she paced the room, her champagne silk gown snapping around her ankles like a flag of truce that neither of them intended to honor. "You want legitimacy," Nyla said, her voice cutting through the silence. She didn't look at him. She was tracing the architectural renderings of the Jeju resort spread across the table. "You want the world to see carbon-neutral glass and sustainable timber, not the blood-stained ledgers of Busan's docks. My name provides the seal of approval from the UN and every major ESG investor in Europe. Without me, this project is just a very expensive monument to money laundering." Min-jae's eyes tracked her movement, a slow, predatory flicker. "And what does the visionary architect get in return? Aside from a blue diamond that costs more than most of your previous commissions combined." Nyla stopped, her hand resting on the blueprints. She turned to face him, her expression devoid of the warmth she had projected for the cameras. "I want the board seat, not an advisory role. I want full veto power over the supply chain and a 20% stake in the tech infrastructure you're burying beneath the foundation. I know you're building a private data network, Min-jae. I want the keys to it. A low, dark chuckle vibrated in Min-jae's throat. He stood, moving toward her with a grace that felt lethal. He stopped inches away, the height difference forcing her to tilt her chin up, though she didn't flinch. You're asking for the heart of my operation, Nyla. That's a very high price for a yes on a cliffside. The price of your survival is always high, she countered. The financial supervisory service is closing in. By the time we break up in 18 months, this resort will be the most celebrated architectural achievement in Asia, and your shadow assets will be scrubbed clean by my reputation. You stay out of prison, I become the most powerful developer on the continent. Min-jae reached out, his thumb grazing the gold chain at her waist. The touch wasn't romantic. It was a measurement of her pulse. It was steady. 18 months of public appearances, galas, shared suites. Every move we make will be dissected by the press. Can you play the part of the devoted fiancé? Or will that razor-sharp tongue give us away by the second course of dinner? I'm an architect, Min-jae, she whispered, her eyes burning into his. I specialize in creating beautiful facades. I can build us a love story that the whole world will believe. Just make sure you don't start believing it yourself. Min-jae pulled back, his face a mask of cold professionalism. He picked up a fountain pen and slid the contract across the desk. Welcome to the firm, Nyla. Try not to burn the building down while you're in it. The Busan International Diamond Gala was not a party. It was a high-stakes theater of war draped in velvet and obsidian. As the gilded doors of the Grand Hyatt swung open, the air fractured under the rapid-fire strobes of 100 cameras. Min-jae Park didn't just walk into the room, he colonized it. Dressed in a midnight black suit that seemed to absorb the light, he looked every bit the reformed titan. Beside him, Nyla was a vision of structural elegance in a structured metallic gown that mimicked the shimmering scales of a deep-sea predator. Her hand was tucked into the crook of his arm, her touch light, practiced, and utterly hollow. "Smile, Min-jae," she murmured, her lips barely moving as they glided past a row of bowing tech executives. "The CEO of Samsung is watching, and you currently look like you're contemplating a triple homicide." Min-jae's grip on her hand tightened, just enough to be felt, his thumb tracing the edge of her palm in a gesture that looked like a caress to the onlookers, but felt like a warning to her. "I'm merely wondering if your designer realized this dress looks like armor, Nyla. Are you expecting an assassination attempt, or just a difficult conversation with the press?" "In this room, they're the same thing," she replied, tilting her head toward him with a look of simulated adoration. "And considering your family's history with the Busan docks, I thought a little extra protection was prudent." The barb hit its mark. Min-jae's jaw tightened, a brief ripple of muscle that the photographers missed, but Nyla felt through his sleeve. They reached the center of the ballroom, the epicenter of the city's power. Waiters in white gloves offered champagne, which they both took with the synchronized grace of a championship dance team. "You're playing the part well," Min-jae said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration as he leaned down to her ear. To the crowd, it was a shared secret between lovers. To Nyla, it was a growl. "But don't mistake my cooperation for weakness. You've scrubbed my accounts, but you haven't lived in my world. These people don't just want to see our engagement. They want to see if they can find a crack in the glass." "Then let them look," Nyla whispered back, her eyes sparking with a defiance that matched the diamonds at her throat. She stepped closer, closing the gap until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "The more they stare at us, the less they look at your shipping manifests. I'm the best distraction you've ever had, Minjae. Try to look grateful. For a split second, the performance faltered. Minjae looked down at her, and for the first time, the calculation in his eyes was replaced by a raw, searing curiosity. The chemistry between them wasn't romantic. It was a volatile chemical reaction. Two apex predators, realizing they were the only ones in the room who truly spoke the same language. "Careful, Nyla," he warned, his voice like velvet over gravel. "If you play the role too well, I might decide to keep you." "You couldn't afford the maintenance," she shot back, her smile blinding as she turned to greet the approaching mayor. The storm that had been brewing over the Busan coastline finally broke, lashing the floor-to-ceiling windows of Minjae's private penthouse with a violence that matched the energy inside. The gala had ended an hour ago, but the adrenaline still hummed in Nyla's veins like a live wire. She stood in the center of the minimalist living room, unzipping the metallic scales of her gown, her silhouette reflected against the dark glass. Minjae was at the bar, his tuxedo jacket discarded on a leather armchair. He had pulled his tie loose, and as he reached for a decanter, his silk shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. The movement was stiff. "The mayor's wife is a gossip, but she's a useful one," Nyla said, stepping out of her dress and into a silk robe. "By morning, the narrative will be that we're too obsessed with each other to care about the docks. You're welcome." Minjae didn't answer. He downed a glass of amber liquid, his back still turned. When he reached for the bottle again, the light from a passing lightning strike caught the sleeve of his shirt, soaked through with a dark, spreading stain. Nyla froze. "Minjae, you're bleeding." "It's an old debt," he rasped, his voice more gravel than velvet. "The rival faction at the gala, a accidental graze in the hallway, it's nothing." He moved to peel back the damp fabric, his fingers clumsier than she had ever seen them. Nyla stepped forward, her professional distance dissolving. "Sit down, before you ruin the rug and my investment." She forced him into the chair, her fingers steady as she unbuttoned his shirt. As the fabric fell away, she didn't just see the black ink of the dragon. She saw what the dragon was protecting. Beneath the intricate scales, the skin was a roadmap of jagged, puckered silver, burn marks and deep blade scars that no laser could fully erase. The dragon didn't just wrap around his arm. It was a shroud for a body that had been systematically broken. "My uncle," Minjae whispered, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as Nyla pressed a sterile cloth to the fresh, shallow cut near his shoulder. "He didn't want a successor. He wanted a warning. He left me in a warehouse in Ulsan for 3 days when I was 19. The tattoo. I drew it myself afterward, to remind me that even a beast can be reborn from ash." Nyla's breath hitched. This wasn't the calm predator she had negotiated with. This was a man who had built a fortress of stone and ink because the people who were supposed to love him had tried to dismantle him. For the first time, she didn't see a tycoon or a criminal. She saw a blueprint of survival. She traced the edge of a scar with the tip of her finger, her touch lighter than the morning mist in Jeju. Minjae flinched, then settled, his gaze dropping to hers. The silence between them shifted. It wasn't the silence of a standoff anymore, but the heavy, suffocating quiet of two people who had both learned that the world only respects what it cannot break. "You're not the only one who survived a fire to be here, Minjae," she said softly, her eyes meeting his obsidian ones. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. The predator looked vulnerable. Then, he caught her wrist, his grip firm but no longer cold. "Then stop looking at me like I'm a project, Nyla. I'm the man holding the matches." The peace of the penthouse was shattered, not by a sound, but by the frantic, synchronized vibration of 3 different devices. Nyla's phone glowed on the marble counter, a relentless strobe of notifications that turned the room a sickly blue. She pulled away from Minjae, the warmth of the moment vanishing as she swiped the screen. The headline was already trending. The architect's blood money. Is Nyla Adeyemi building on a graveyard? A digital dossier had been dumped onto an encrypted whistleblower site and mirrored by every major news outlet in Seoul. It wasn't just speculation, it was a surgical strike. There were grainy photos of Minjae at the Ulsan docks, and, more damagingly, a series of forged bank transfers linking Nyla's primary design firm to a known syndicate shell company. "They're efficient," Nyla whispered, her voice tight. "This isn't just a leak, it's a coordinated demolition." Minjae stood, his unbuttoned shirt hanging off his scarred shoulders as he crossed to the wall of monitors. His face had returned to its default setting, a mask of frozen granite. He didn't need to check the news. He could see the reality in the plummeting stock tickers of his legitimate tech subsidiaries. "My uncle's associates," he murmured, his eyes scanning the data. "They don't want the Jeju project. They want to bury the man who tried to make it clean." Nyla's email inbox began to swell. "It's starting. The Scandinavian Green Fund is pulling their endorsement. The London Sustainable Council has paused my fellowship. They're not even waiting for a comment, Minjae. To them, my brand is already radioactive." She looked at the ring on her finger. The blue diamond that had felt like a trophy only hours ago now looked like a shackle. This was the exact scenario Minjae had intended when he proposed on the cliffside. But now that it was happening, the victory felt hollow. The trap had backfired, catching them both in the same jaws. "You said you traced my funding," Minjae said, turning to her. "You knew the risks." "I knew the financial risks, Minjae. I didn't count on a ghost from your past handing out my professional head on a platter." She stepped toward him, her silk robe fluttering. "My investors are fleeing. They don't care about the truth. They care about the optics. And right now, the optics say I'm the mistress of a Busan mobster." Minjae didn't flinch at the word. He stepped into her space, his presence heavy and suffocating. "Then we give them a different story. If they want a monster, we give them a god. If they want a scandal, we give them a revolution." "There is no we if my firm collapses by sunrise," she snapped, but her heart wasn't in the anger. She saw the calculation returning to his eyes. The predator was waking up. "The resort," he said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "We don't defend it. We accelerate it. We make it so essential to the country's future that they can't afford to let us fall." Nyla looked at the screen, then back at the man who had nearly been broken by his own blood. She realized then that the only way to save her reputation was to lean entirely into his darkness. The blue light of the holographic projectors cast Nyla's face in a ghostly cyan, her eyes darting across a lattice of data points and architectural wireframes. Outside, the storm had settled into a rhythmic funeral rain, but inside the penthouse, the air was electric with the scent of ozone and desperation. She wasn't just drawing lines, she was weaving a web. "If we play defense, we lose," Nyla said, her voice a low, focused rasp. She swiped a translucent pane of glass, expanding the structural plans for the Jeju resort until they filled the center of the room. "The public thinks this is a luxury getaway for the elite. The government thinks it's an environmental PR win. We're going to give them something they can't afford to destroy." Minjae stood behind her, his shadow stretching across the blueprints like a dark omen. He watched as she dismantled her own elegant, sustainable curves and replaced them with something brutalist, hidden, and profound. She was embedding his proprietary black box tech, The very algorithms the authorities were trying to seize directly into the resort's sensory nervous system. "You're turning my surveillance grid into the building's life support," Min-jae murmured, a hint of genuine admiration cutting through his cold exterior. "I'm making the building the grid, Min-jae," she corrected, her fingers flying as she integrated biometric security into the foundations and encrypted data hubs into the geothermal cooling vents. "By the time I'm done, this won't be a hotel. It will be the most secure, state-of-the-art national intelligence node in the Pacific. If the government shuts you down, they shut down their own new smart city infrastructure. They won't just protect you, they'll depend on you." She turned to him, her champagne silk robe fluttering as she moved. The blue diamond on her hand caught the glow of the holographic fortress. "I'm giving your shadow a body of concrete and glass. It's the ultimate architectural camouflage, but to do it, I need the raw encryption keys. All of them." Min-jae stepped into the light, the black dragon on his arm illuminated by the flickering data. For the first time, the predator looked at the architect and saw a mind more ruthless than his own. He was the one who moved in the shadows, but she was the one building the cage that would keep the shadows safe. "You're not just saving my reputation, Nyla," he said, his voice a lethal hum. "You're building a throne." "I don't like to lose, Min-jae," she whispered, her eyes burning with a cold, ambitious fire. "And if I'm going to be tied to a monster, I might as well make sure the monster owns the mountain." She hit the execute key, and the blueprints turned from a vision of paradise into a map of an unbreakable fortress. The trap was gone. The merger was complete. The skeleton of the Jeju resort rose from the red earth like a ribcage, a brutalist monument of raw concrete and reinforced glass. Nyla walked the perimeter of the third-floor cantilever, her cream silk trousers whipping in the salt wind. Beside her, Min-jae was a study in deceptive leisure, his ivory linen shirt unbuttoned at the cuffs, dark sunglasses reflecting the construction cranes that hovered like prehistoric birds. He looked like a developer inspecting a dream. He moved like a soldier clearing a room. "The server farm is encased in 4 feet of lead-lined basalt," Nyla said, pointing toward the subterranean levels. "Even if they cut the power, the building breathes. It remembers." Min-jae didn't look at the blueprints. His head tilted slightly, his focus shifting to a black SUV winding up the coastal road, a vehicle that wasn't on the morning's manifest. "Nyla," he said, his voice dropping an octave into a register of pure, lethal authority. "Step behind the pillar. Now." "What?" The air didn't crack. It hissed. A high-velocity round shattered the glass panel 3 inches from Nyla's shoulder, turning the expensive transparency into a cloud of diamond dust. Before she could scream, Min-jae's hand was a vice around her waist, hollowing out her breath as he tackled her behind a structural column. The calm predator she had negotiated with vanished. In his place was a force of nature that didn't calculate. It executed. Min-jae reached into the small of his back, pulling a suppressed firearm with a fluid, terrifying grace that suggested he had done this 1,000 times. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He spoke into a lapel mic in rapid-fire Korean, his eyes scanning the horizon with the cold, thermal precision of a hawk. 2 shooters, North Ridgeline, he murmured, more to himself than her. Another round thudded into the concrete. Nyla pressed her back against the cold stone, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the dragon on his arm flex as he gripped the weapon, the ink seemingly coming alive in the harsh island sun. "Stay low," he commanded. He stepped out from the cover, not a frantic dash, but a deliberate, measured stride. He fired 3 times, Each pop was muffled, insignificant against the roar of the ocean, yet the results were absolute. Across the ridge, the silhouette of a man tumbled from the brush. Min-jae didn't wait to watch him fall. He pivoted, his movements a blur of ivory and ink, shielding Nyla's body with his own as his security team swarmed the site like a black tide.
The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Min-jae turned back to her, his face a mask of terrifying stillness. There was a spray of crimson across his white linen sleeve, not his own. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face to check for glass shards, his touch suddenly, jarringly light. "You're safe," he said. Nyla looked at the blood on his cuff, then into his obsidian eyes. She had built him a fortress of data and stone, but she realized now that the most dangerous part of the architecture was the man standing in front of her. The scent of iron and sea salt still clung to Nyla's skin when the black sedan intercepted her at the edge of the Jeju construction site. She was alone. Min-jae was occupied coordinating the disposal of the Ridgeline shooters, and the man waiting in the back seat was the antithesis of Min-jae's jagged modern power. He was an elder statesman of the Busan underworld, a man with silver hair and a silk tie who looked like someone's grandfather until you noticed the dead space in his eyes. "Sit, Miss Adeyemi," he said, his voice a dry parchment rustle, "before the ink on your new blueprints dries and the concrete becomes your tomb." Nyla sat, her champagne silk robe replaced by a sharp charcoal grey suit that felt like armor. She didn't look at the guards flanking the car. She looked at the man who had ordered the hit on her life 10 minutes ago. "You're Park's uncle," she stated, her voice as level as a horizon line. "I am the man who made him, and I am the man who will unmake him by sunrise," he replied. He slid a thin, encrypted tablet across the leather seat. "Min-jae is a romantic fool. He thinks a smart city can hide a lifetime of sin. The government is already reviewing the files I sent them. By tomorrow, he will be an international pariah. But you are a visionary, an asset, a clean face." Nyla glanced at the tablet. It was a formal immunity agreement, pre-signed by a high-ranking prosecutor in Seoul. All it required was her digital signature and her testimony, a confirmation that she was a victim of Min-jae's coercion, a designer held hostage by a criminal's ambition. "Testify," the old man urged. "Tell the world he forced the merger. Walk away with your firm intact, your reputation scrubbed of his shadow, and a state-funded contract to finish the resort without him. You can be the hero who exposed the dragon, or you can be the girl who went down with the ship." Nyla looked out the window. High on the cliff, she could see Min-jae's silhouette against the sunset, his white linen shirt a flag of defiance. He was a monster, yes. He was a man built of scars and secrets. But he was also the only person who had ever looked at her brilliance and didn't try to diminish it. He had tried to weaponize it. She thought of the blood on his sleeve and the way he had shielded her body with his own. She thought of the fortress they had built together, a masterpiece of shadow and light. "The ship isn't sinking," Nyla said, her voice dropping into a low, terrifying hum of certainty. She slid the tablet back to him, her finger lingering on the blank signature line just long enough to show him she wasn't afraid. "And I don't play the victim. It's bad for the brand." "You're choosing a dead man," the uncle hissed. "No," Nyla whispered, her hand reaching for the door handle. "I'm choosing my partner, and if I were you, I'd start wondering if your own concrete is as reinforced as mine." The grand opening of the Jeju Obsidian Resort was not a celebration. It was a coronation. A year after the blood on the linen and the whispers of scandal,
The structure stood as a haunting masterpiece of dark basalt and intelligent glass, pulsing with the silent data of a nation's security. The global elite had returned, not as critics, but as pilgrims to the new altar of power. Nyla stood at the center of the grand atrium, her gown a liquid black silk that seemed to drink the light. Her crown braid was gone, replaced by a sharp, architectural bob that grazed her jawline. On her finger, the blue diamond caught the strobes of the international press, no longer a shackle, but a seal of office. She watched the South Korean Prime Minister shake hands with the man who had once been a ghost in the shipping docks. Min Jae approached her, his presence a calm, predatory hum. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to hide the scars, his ivory shirt buttoned to the throat. He didn't offer a romantic smile for the cameras. He didn't need to. The world no longer looked for a fairy tale. They looked for a directive. The uncle's assets were liquidated this morning, Min Jae murmured, standing close enough for his sandalwood scent to mingle with her perfume. He's currently explaining his tax discrepancies to the very prosecutors he tried to buy.
A structural failure, Nyla replied, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of the grid she had built. He relied on old foundations. He didn't realize the ground had shifted beneath him. Min Jae looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the calm predator looked at his equal with something deeper than respect. They weren't a couple bound by the fragile threads of affection or the desperate need for approval. They were a merger of intellect and iron, an ecosystem that thrived in the space between the light and the shadow. "They're calling us the new sovereigns," he said, nodding toward a headline scrolling on a nearby digital pillar. "The reputation they tried to ruin. It's become the benchmark for the next century." "Reputation is just a facade, Min Jae," Nyla said, turning to face him. She adjusted his lapel, her touch deliberate and cold, yet undeniably intimate. "What we built is a fortress, and the beautiful thing about a fortress is that you don't need people to like you. You only need them to respect the walls." The cameras flashed, capturing the two of them, the architect and the wolf, standing at the edge of their new empire. They didn't look like lovers. They looked like the future. The branding assassination had failed because Nyla Adeyemi hadn't just survived the fire. She had redesigned the flames. As the sun set over the Jeju cliffs, bleeding that same saffron gold from the morning of the proposal, Nyla realized she hadn't lost her soul. She had simply given it a more resilient architecture.